This podcast is intended and contains general information on financial strategies, investments, and products only. Whilst Luke and I are both licensed financial advisors, we don't know your personal circumstances, goals, or objectives. We highly recommend that you reach out to your financial advisor or investment professional to discuss any of the topics that we've covered today before taking any action. Our full disclosure, copies of our financial services guide, and additional information about Seneca Financial Solutions and Bold Wealth can be found in the show notes.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Wealth and Toil. My name is Luke Laretive. I'm from Seneca Financial Solutions, and today I'm here with, you guessed it, my friend Dylan Pargiter-Green, DPG. How are you, mate?
Partner in podcasting, not partner in crime this week.
I'm trying to be original, keeping it creative.
I'm very well, mate. I'm very well. It's a beautiful sunny day down here in Hobart, Tasmania. So yeah, very, very happy to be here podcasting for another week with yours truly. See the T-Wolves, your boys, got a nice little series sweep on KD's team. Said that Mr. Ant-Man was his favourite player in the NBA to watch.
Mate, I am that excited about the Minnesota Timberwolves at the moment. This may turn into a Timberwolves podcast if we're not careful, but they are playing game 2 against Denver after going 1-up in the second series over the weekend, this morning or this afternoon at 12:30. So I'll be avoiding all social media until after work, and I can sit down this afternoon and get stuck into that game a little bit later.
I'm not going to do any work this afternoon, unfortunately.
I wish I had that luxury. Now, mate, we're going to talk a bit about debt today, all kinds of weird and wonderful debts. This is really a DPG special. It's probably outside my my wheelhouse. I think I don't have any debt, so you'll have to tell you're the guru on this front. So
just mate, all the credit cards on the ponies on the weekend.
Let's not joke about the harsh reality of people's gamblings. But so let's get started. The government has recently announced some reforms, shall we say?
Yeah, call them reforms.
The way they're looking at indexing HECS or HELP debt now. Back in my day, it was called HECS debt.
Back in your day, university was free, wasn't it? How old are you?
Well, I wish, mate. I wish they pillaged me. No, they absolutely pillaged me. But no, it was so maybe just walk people through, what the reforms are and why it's important.
Yeah, really briefly, like not trying to talk about too much news, and obviously it's still got to go past all of the government legislative processes and such. But I guess the big reason behind this was last year HECS was indexed at 7.1%. It was the biggest rise in a very, very long time, and it's because it's linked with inflation. So whatever the inflation figure is throughout the full year is what your HECS or HELP debt was being indexed by, and that meant that people with a $50,000 HECS debt who might have paid, if they were paying top marginal tax bracket, it'd be 10% of their pre-tax wage off that. They were getting a $3,500 bill on top of that, basically amount that they paid off. So basically halving the progress that they might have done. Now that sort of created a big conversation piece. Last year it was a big conversation piece. I had a lot of clients, who, particularly those professionals who might have gone on to do masters or even beyond masters, like PhDs and things, who have quite a significant HECS debt despite them being well into their careers still, were talking to me about whether or not they should pay off their HECS or whether they should not save the money. And look, everybody's circumstances are different. We'll talk a little bit about what you can do in each of those options. Fast forward to this year, and it was sort of looking at like it was going to be about the 4.5% year-on-year inflation figures, and we should get a bit more data on that later in the month or early next month on what inflation for the year is looking like. But that prompted a response again in the media that over that 2-year period, in some cases, the HECS debt for people was going to be indexed at between 11 and 12%, and that was unsustainable. For a lot of people who have gone to university on the back of, being told that was the way that they were going to be able to get a career So the government's introduced a reform or a goal reform or whatever it might be, which is to say that they have the option now of indexing your help debt at inflation or wage increases. Now, we all
So
probably know.
CPI, so they're going to do it with CPI or the wage index, like the ABS. Is that what they're looking at?
Yeah, that's right. And so like the wage index has been a lot lower
Flatter.
than
Yeah.
CPI and generally has been like that for a fairly long time.
It's more stable too, as a general comment. Like wage inflation is more stable than sort of systematic inflation, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it's less prone to blips. So single year inflation hadn't been at 7% for a year. We actually had years where inflation was really, really low during those low interest rate periods, and there was, the reason that interest rates were so low is because governments were, were cognizant of the fact that growth overall was relatively slow. But what it means in all of that is basically that HECS will not go up by as much. And also last year's HECS that went up is being grandfathered as well. So that HECS is going to go back. You might see a little bit of a drop on what your indexation was from last year.
Look, we need to be encouraging people to go to university, and we certainly need to be encouraging people to go to further education and technical college and these sorts of things and get trades and skills. I think it's smart policy and a good investment of taxpayer money to be loaning these people money as a general comment. And I know there are people who take advantage of it, and I understand the arguments around people who move overseas and earn money over there, and maybe some parents who don't go back to work or never make it to the workforce for whatever reason. But I think they're definitely the exceptions, not the rule. And I love the fact that university is, or further education, I should say, is a fantastic way to advance yourself as a person, to expose yourself to different people, particularly if you're not from the upper classes and the elitists out there, and you are from a middle class or lower class background. It's a fantastic way for you to become exposed to probably a part of the world that you haven't been exposed to, and further yourself. So I'm very grateful to the government to being able to fund my university, because I wouldn't have been able to afford to have gone otherwise. And certainly, I think we need to be. That's exactly the kind of policy we need to be enacting to ensure that we're not constantly transferring money from the poor to the wealthy, and from the young wage earners to the old asset owners.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, universities subsidise at lots of different levels as well. So if you think about like a lower income or regional household will generally get a Commonwealth supported place, taking the average cost of a subject from between sort of $4,000 and $8,000 down to about $1,200. So already there's some support there. Overall, universities are very heavily government subsidised as well. They form the major research bodies of most of what comes out of Australia in terms of innovation. So that's a really cool thing as well. The reason that we bring this up, though, I think, or the reason that I wanted to bring this up, is because this is a debt that is affecting people's capacity to grow their wealth post-university, because they haven't necessarily always thought about it in the lead up and the consequences of. So, I think it's a little bit of an issue. Whilst I agree with you, I think more, as many people should go to university as possible. But, in the same way that we tell people to go into anything with a bit of a plan, I think having a bit of a concept of what you want to get out of that university and having an understanding of where that puts you in the workforce, and not necessarily being put into a place where you're going to have limited capacity to repay that debt. And if that is something that you're in a position to potentially think about earlier, if you can make small contributions, or potentially if you're a parent who has the financial capacity to think about funding that debt up front, or some of that debt, you're going to make a very significant difference to your child's capacity to then have greater cash flow, invest, build their own wealth, and yeah, I mean, I'm a massive component of doing things for our kids, doing things for the people that we love, and whilst we have the capacity to do it,
We mostly love. We mostly
love. Yeah, you love your kids 6 days a week. I think is the saying. 6 out of 7 years is a positive year in the markets, and 6 out of 7 days are positive with your kids. But no, like in all seriousness,
from the two blokes with no kids.
That's right. Yeah,
exactly
that's
right.
right. Yeah, I've got. I'm sure there's some somewhere for you, mate, in a previous life. No, I can't say. They've been together forever.
I could have a small family in Colombia somewhere. You never know.
Yeah. So what I wanted to talk about is the effect of having a HECS debt here. One of the things is HECS comes off your income pre-tax. So there is a benefit there as opposed to a lot of other debts. You're actually paying that debt back with pre-tax earnings because it is charged as an additional tax rate. You will see on a payslip, you're actually paying it off. You will just receive a lower after-tax amount. And that's a positive as opposed to something where you're paying it like a credit card or a personal loan where you are accumulating interest on post-tax money. So there is a benefit there of HECS. There's also an automation of that as well. And the main thing that it affects is your serviceability, so your capacity to lend further.
Borrow further is what you mean.
Lend, borrow, whatever, all the same, mate. All the same. You wouldn't know anything about lending, all right? So all I really want to finish up with there is think about how much debt you're going into and treat your HECS a little bit like a debt that you would take out to go and purchase a course of your own will, and also think about the types of things that you're doing with by taking out that HECS debt.
I think that's something I did. I don't know much about sort of the financial planning side of this, but I do know just from my own experience. Like, I went to university because I wanted to go, and I never really thought about the money side of it too much. But I remember when I failed 2 units first year, and you're like, oh, that's actually cost me $6 or $7 grand or whatever it was to do those units, and I've got to pay it again, to resit those units to get my qualifications. So I think, it is. It's when I went to uni when I was still 17. So like in Perth, you go quite young. I think I was definitely, wasn't really aware of kind of what I was getting myself into and just how expensive it was to go to school. And certainly when I went back and did my master's, I was acutely aware of the price that I was paying, and that I wasn't going to stuff around and go surfing every day and not turn up to class and not put my best foot forward because it was coming out of I was fortunate to be able to put it on HECS, but I knew it was going to be coming out of my wages for a number of years thereafter.
Yeah, absolutely. So that probably takes me to the next point, which is thinking about how you can maybe fund this for your kids. So we do a lot of planning with parents to fund high school education, primarily the sort of years from 5 or 7 through to year 12, and that is because that's a very big number that you have to pay at the time. There is no HECS, unfortunately.
Bloody expensive is the answer to the question. Yeah.
Well, we say this, right? But like, university is more expensive than
Bill. No. Private school, like top end private schools, 30 or 40 grand a year.
Okay, but on average, right? Private school isn't 40 grand a year. There's probably 10 schools, maybe 12 schools in the country that cost that much. But most private schools fall to about half that.
I want to know,
university without a Commonwealth supported place, if $4,000 to $6,000 per unit, you're looking at between $16,000 and $24,000 per semester.
Well, I mean, yeah, maybe uni is a bit more expensive these days. And I think my HECS debt, when I finished my undergrad with my couple of missteps in first year, attributed to some easterly winds and southwest swells. Probably came to 27. I think it's 27 grand with the
Did you get a Commonwealth supported place though?
No, I was just a commerce at UWA. I think it was 25 grand or 30 grand, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I
mean,
this
is, hold on, let's go back.
Potentially,
this is in 2003, 2004. Yeah. So we're talking
international students are often paying like $8,000 a unit.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
I can't remember. I can't actually. And what do you do? So you do you do eight. Okay, $8 grand a unit, 4 units a semester, 32 grand a semester, 64 grand a year. So you're telling me a 3-year bachelor's degree costs an international student over 100 grand?
Yep.
And you're telling me that a local same degree costs,
and they have to pay it up front.
Yeah, I know the international students have
a local non-Commonwealth supported place, and potentially we'll see if we can find these rates for a couple of universities and put them in the show notes. But a local for a non-Commonwealth supported place, I think it's about 4 to 6 grand, depending on the subject and depending on what stage of university you're at. Commonwealth supported place, usually they're about $1,200 a subject. Like I was very lucky. I came from a regional area, got a Commonwealth supported place, and had about a similar HECS debt to what you did. I also didn't go and do a master's or anything like that, and that's when it really kicks in.
I did my master's was another 30 grand on top of that when I did that. Yeah. I'm just talking about undergrad here. But yeah, maybe 20 years later, it's gone up in price, which wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
Isn't this interesting though? Like when I was doing university, I don't know what university costs. I have no idea. Right.
I didn't care. I was just going to be a schoollionaire anyway. It wasn't going to be an issue. So I was just.
How's that working out for you?
Not very well.
Anyway, the bringing that all back around, right? So I just encourage any parents listening, particularly those parents who have chosen to plan for the private school. It is always a good idea to plan for an additional 3 years to potentially help with that university fee burden. You don't have to necessarily
practical. Yeah, how do you do it? Insurance bond, right?
So with university, we use what are called education bonds. So they're specifically designed to be able to distribute for to multiple beneficiaries for the purposes of paying for education. And unlike a direct investment bond, there's a couple of different things that you can do with it around the distribution for those, even for high school, although it does become a lot more effective when you've got a low or no tax paying person over the age of 18, as opposed to somebody who's under 18 and can only receive the $450 odd from investment return.
Got it.
So the reason that's really powerful is because if you plan, you only have to save small amounts, use compounding, build up a capital war chest, and then some of that fee will actually be paid for from the returns that you have generated over that time.
And what actually matters here for the too long didn't read version, DPG version,
skip to 12 minutes into the podcast.
Skip to the bit Luke cares about. Is essentially you can do by using these investment bonds and the I don't even know why they exist, to be honest, but they do. You can essentially create a tax advantage way to save for these specific events. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be education. I mean, there are education bonds do have to be for education, but the investment stuff, essentially, if you're happy to lock the money away for 10 years and you're happy to contribute to it regularly, and you are a relatively high income earner, chances are it's going to be tax advantage way to spend money that you definitely know you're going to spend. So doesn't mean you can't get the money back. It means you lose some of the advantages if you do decide to pull it out. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty naughty way to fund private school fees and or any regular future expenses that are likely to come up. I remember talking to someone recently, just a mate who is from the UK, and they regularly go back to the UK and want to go back when the kids are older on a regular basis for a holiday and pay for those flights. And I said, well, man, you should just be putting money aside, insurance bond, and in 10 years' time, you're going to have those flights paid for with tax-effective money rather than tax-ineffective money. And
capital gains free after 10 years.
Correct. So let's you should be looking at that. So look, anyway, by the by, tax effective, good way to save. Education's important.
I love what you said there about a known expense. So a lot of people will know that there is an intention from a relatively early stage that they want to send their kids to private school, and that much more likely statistical outcome of going to private school is then further education through university. It's become increasingly the case over the last couple of decades.
I wish it wasn't, but it is.
Well, it'd be great for house prices if more people, chose to go and do skills in trades and things as well. But
I wonder if Newman College, the illustrious Newman College that I went to, still does the buy two get one free. You have 3 kids, you get the third one free to go through Catholic education. I wonder if you can $2,000 a year type sort of setup. I don't think it. I think inflation's got hold of them too. Even the illustrious and highly esteemed establishment that I attended.
Like free university for our boomers and Generation X friends, I think that one has gone with the wind, my friend. The days of a private school or a Catholic school giving out a free.
I'm only joking. I don't think it will. We used to just make jokes because it's the Catholics and they like breeding. But anyway, we'll push on. So, Dill, apart from HECS debt, the other types of debt that kind of we run into, and look, for the benefit of this podcast, let's not do the mortgage thing, right? We'll try and do everything else, cover a little bit at least. Investment debt is the other kind of main thing that comes up in our world. Do you want to just talk through people around maybe how investment debt can work for them in a diversified portfolio of liquid assets, or maybe into a rental property of some description? Just sort of what the basic mechanisms are. Let's not go too.
For sure. The bare bone basics.
Well, mate, I'm simpleton. I like it.
Yeah, just buy 25 properties and retire. Right. That's the.
That's what they tell me on TikTok. That's what they tell you on TikTok.
No, the way to get rich is to buy property, then buy another property, then buy another property, and over leverage yourself into the grave. Basically, no.
Sounds good.
Sounds great. Sounds awesome. No, so look. The most obvious one of this is property, right? So the most commonly leveraged asset that is used for investment in Australia is property. Outside of indirect stuff that you might find is in your superannuation without knowing, or whatever it might be. But Australians have a obsession with property, and it has been over a very long period of time a very, very strong performing investment. And a contributor to current inflation, but we won't go down that path.
Don't get me on my high horse, Still. I'll get the soapbox out. I will.
But generally what we'll see is someone saves up a deposit for a property, and we'll use a $500,000 property as a benchmark here, as something that people might want to buy and invest into. It could be an apartment, a townhouse, a more regional property. It's unlikely that you're going to find a $500,000 property in sort of the major capital cities anymore. And of that, they might save up $100,000 for the deposit, plus another $20,000 for costs, and then they will have a $400,000 loan. So that's called an 80% leverage, or an 80% LVR. That then means that their ownership in that property is the $100,000, but they own the entire benefit of the asset. The power of that is that you need to only see relatively small increases in the capital value that are accelerated or multiplied by the fact that you are not giving the additional capital back to the person who has given you the mortgage. You're simply funding the interest on that. So an example might be, if you own 20% of a property, that property goes up by 5% in value. Well, it's gone up by 25 grand. You've actually made 25% on your deposit minus whatever it's cost you to own over that time. that obviously sounds really good, but when interest rates are 6.5%, you really do need to consider what it is costing you on a yearly basis.
And your
But the
property
power
might
of
not go up in
leverage,
value.
that's also right. That's also
And
right. It doesn't.
and you've got to also factor into the fact, I think, that your expectations for property returns have been fueled by interest rates falling from probably the last time anyone remembered at 17% or 16.5% in the 90s to zero, and now back to 6%. So I just want everyone to be cognizant that what has always happened, whether it's shares, property, any other asset class, is not necessarily what's going to happen. And mean reversion, whilst a phenomena we can all rely on, and normally distributed returns and all of these sort of statistical principles for which we can make decisions, can occur over periods of time that are beyond your lifespan. So, beyond your investment window. And as a result, you need to think about things maybe in a lens of the best decisions you can make with the available information, and not just rely on long-term mean reversion, because it may happen after you're dead. To quote one of my least favorite investors, Warren Buffett, it's not Warren Buffett, actually, it's someone else fucking way smarter than him. But the market can remain.
That is so crass. You cannot say that.
The market can remain insolvent. The market can remain irrational for longer than you can remain solvent. And I think it's actually a Keynes quote. But
there you go. Well,
I'm sure the editors can bleed out my expletives.
Well, the point of some of that is, and all that stuff is that debt is something that you need to take consideration on before you go into it. That property is still an investment; it's still a risk-based asset. However, unlike Luke and his conversations and thoughts around solvency of that, my argument would be that if you go into something like a property with the right attitude, and you go, okay, long term, 2% on a 20% deposit, still getting you 10% return a year, which is it's still pretty good. So
it's elite.
Yeah, 2% is not much for a property to go up in value. The thing that I want for people to understand around that, though, is that property is not this thing that is shown on TV on the block where you make this amazing renovation and make squillions of dollars, and you can flip it and you can renovate it, or you can buy a property and expect that it's just going to shoot up in value. Those things that you see are anomalies. And whilst there is a fundamental level of undersupply in this country for housing, whilst we have very high immigration, and that tends to lead to economic demand, which is what is driving the majority of property price and has done alongside interest rates, like Luke mentioned, we would expect that you will see long-term, slow to steady growth in those assets.
In aggregate.
And yeah. In aggregate, you obviously, in aggregate, I think that's a good point, actually. Like, people will see this number. It's like, oh, house prices in Sydney have gone up 10% over the last 12 months. It's like, well, there's probably 50% of suburbs have grown very, very strongly due to certain projects of infrastructure.
This is the difference between investing in what I call liquid assets and investing in real assets, like what you're talking about, like a house. So if you buy a house, you're buying a single asset exposure in a single street, in a single suburb, on a single block of land with two neighbors and two across the street, or whatever. What happens to the property market more broadly is pretty irrelevant, right? Sure, if all properties go up in value, it would be reasonable to expect that your property also goes up in value. However, there may be idiosyncratic issues with your particular area, that particular house relative to other houses in that area, that make that property more or less valuable, or under or out or overperform. At the end of the day, it is no different to buying an individual share, buying a portfolio of 10 shares, or buying a portfolio of 10,000 shares. The more you diversify, the more you go up the number of investments, the more likely is you get a fair representation of what the market conditions are, and the less representation you get on any individual asset. Now, buying an individual property is just buying an individual asset. It's just buying one share. If you buy well, I'd rather own one great asset than 9,999 other shit ones. However, you've got to still be able to identify that asset. You've still got to have expertise in doing that. And in my opinion, it's a much more difficult asset class for the average family in Australia to gain diversified exposure to, particularly if they insist on doing it in a real asset direct way.
Yeah, I think as well, like a lot of the people that have done very well out of property, we're talking our grandparents and our parents who might have owned property, if parents have owned property, have held that property for 30 years. Like that's a long time to hold an asset, right? And yes, there is a fairly good steady growth rate, but most property markets, like if you look at the property market for Sydney between I think 2007 and 2015, it was flat. Like that's wild considering what you've seen since 2015. Imagine buying what is now probably a $2 million house in, I don't know.
I don't know anything about Sydney.
Okay.
All I'm saying is that I suppose all I'm trying to say, get back to the point here, Dill, is that when you make investments with debt, what you need to understand is two main points, and that is one, leverage works both ways. So, like Dill says, if you generate a 2% return on 5 times gearing, or 80% leverage, as Dill refers to it as, you're going to make a 25% return on your money, or a 20% return on your money. It's
2% 10, mate.
Well, yeah, exactly right. So if it works the other way. If the property falls by 2%, you're gonna lose 20% of your money. And so I just think that just understanding that leverage works both ways. And if you think property prices don't go down, please feel free to email me and I can show you that they do. The reality is that you need to understand that leverage works both ways. And I think the other thing that is different to the past is the price of capital, the cost of capital, and that is the fact that you used to borrow money, that leverage used to cost you 2, 3, 4%. Well, it now costs you 5, 6s, and 7s, depending on where you borrow it and who you are. So I personally, I find it really hard for my clients, which are generally who are in the stage where they're trying to reduce or have reduced or never had debt, to justify a lot of investment properties at the moment. They just don't stack up from my perspective, from a pure yield perspective. Whether that's commercial properties on 4s and 5s, or residential investments on even lower yields, unless you're making significant assumptions around what you think the capital growth of that particular property is, or you can add value or do something that's unique, and you have particular expertise and an advantage in that area. But that being said, as Dill says, the gearing, the cost of that, if you wanted to gain gearing, mortgage debt or investment debt for property is some of the cheapest debt you can access. And that is what makes the asset class interesting.
One of the things that I like about that as well, and particularly for people, owning your own home is a whole nother thing.
Conversation,
yeah, because, by owning your own home, you have not only have you got an asset, hopefully, that accumulates in value over a long period of time whilst you live there, but you also have security of a roof over your head. You're not paying rent. You're not paying all these other things. It's probably more expensive.
I think it's a tax advantage deal. I mean, I know everyone thinks I'm a property hater, but I think I'm just a realist. It's tax advantaged. And the reason why investment properties do work for high income people is generally because of the tax depreciation shield that you get from owning an asset that essentially loses money every month. And the reason why people spend squillions on their own personal house is because if you can borrow a heap of money and hold it for a long time, inflation will work for you. You're geared to that inflation, and as a result, and then you never pay capital gains tax at the end. And that is the reason why property is the number one asset class in this country. And that is the reason why, if you look through the BRW rich list every year, you'll see 70% of people in there have made their money in property one way or another. It's why you look at listed companies that are arguably rubbish retailers. Harvey Norman, that is essentially essentially a glorified property trust. And
It's the Macca's model.
It's the Macca's model. It is there is literally billions and trillions of dollars that are being deployed in this asset class for the reasons that we have just outlined, whether that being the cheapest access to debt that you can get, inflation working for you on leverage over time, and finally the tax advantaged nature of either investment properties or owning your own home. While I talk about tax advantage, talk to me about whether you can do this with my products, my SMAs, and the products we run, or you can do this with any share portfolio. Talk to me about the benefits of a margin loan or an investment loan, or I don't want you to go into detail, but essentially creating a debt recycling facility to generate investment returns. Don't go off on a deal tangent. Just give me the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, we're running low on time. Otherwise, this is going to be the longest podcast ever. But margin lending is generally more expensive, so that's effectively getting a loan specifically to go and invest in a given portfolio. And then, if that portfolio is to drop to a certain level, there is something called a margin call, which is where you need to make a fairly quick payment back to the lender. The way I like to think of the best way, I think, to lend for investing in other assets is by using a security of a single asset that has much lower value fluctuation, such as a property. So what, Luke?
Can I go technical and say it's got the same or very similar valuations in price? It's just you don't measure it very frequently. Sorry, that's me having a snipe, but I'm doing it anyway.
Well, that's okay though, because as long as if I'm not measuring it and you're not measuring it, and the bank's not measuring it, it doesn't matter, right? Like,
agreed.
Yeah. So the reason I like that is because it's got a more stable valuation that you can sit on it. You've got an asset there that the bank is happy to take what is a relatively lower cost debt position on, and you can then take that money and you can invest in something else that hopefully grows at a faster rate than what your interest cost is after tax. So the concept of debt recycling in this case is where we take a lump sum of money and we pay off, or we take additional money against the equity and we then invest that money. By taking that lump sum, paying it in, obviously paying down the debt to a new level, and then redrawing that as new investment debt against that same asset, you're then changing the purpose of the debt and of course creating a tax effective debt on something that you weren't previously able to do. So we know we can't claim our mortgage as our tax deduction, unfortunately, or fortunately for house prices for those people that aren't in the property market. But by doing this, you can then take that money and you can diversify your asset pool. And I think that's a really cool thing that you can do is if you've got a lot of equity and you're looking for overall growth, taking that equity out and buying another property if you already own a property is just hedging your bets in that one sector. Whereas if you're overall looking to create additional tax advantaged investments, looking to diversify into things that are listed, liquid, things that you can access if you do need them, or in the event that you sell your asset and you need to pay some of that money back to the bank, it's a good way of doing it.
It's like when constructing portfolios, like in my kind of land, we want diverse sources of growth, right? And we want to be able to make money lots of different ways. And I think it's kind of hard to imagine just having all my money tied to one asset, one house in one street, or particularly having a lot of equity tied up there. You do want to diversify that. Now it is re-gearing to a certain extent. It's probably re-gearing in a sensible and measured way. Yeah. So I think there is a temptation, particularly when the markets are flying, to get carried away with that kind of strategy. But as Dill says, there are some tax advantage, particularly for higher income people, that can come from doing that if they're at working age. And it can help you, get your mortgage down quicker or build your investment portfolio quicker, kind of depending on how you want to skin the cat.
I think that's a good way to summarize, and it's a good strategy for those people who are in their 40s or even early 50s who are looking like they're going to transition to a retirement period in their 60s and still have debt. If you're worried about that, you need to probably do something about it. And yes, you can channel money into additional mortgage repayments, but you may not have the cash flow to do that, or by doing that, you may be sacrificing in other things that you might otherwise contribute to. So, an example might be, instead of paying additional money off your mortgage each week or each month, make an extra superannuation contribution, claim the tax deduction now, allow that asset to build in a growth portfolio. And then when you're 60 and you decide to retire, you can take that money out tax-free and pay off the sum balance of your mortgage.
It's just about measuring the interest costs in the interim versus the tax benefit to you every year. And, having a financial planner, cough, 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 call Dylan, sort that out for you. So, I mean, these are not complicated. I mean, nothing that Dill and I do is complicated. We are not geniuses, right? I'm not talking about your sex life, Dylan. I'm talking about financial planning. We are not geniuses. All this is just our area of expertise. It's our job. It's a thing that we do every day. And so we just know our way around it reasonably well. And we can help you kind of apply some of the shortcuts and principles that help people get a bit further ahead in life and make their money work a little bit harder for them, and make sure that the human capital they do deploy gets the highest possible return for themselves and their families into the future. So if that's something you want to have a chat about, you can hit me up, you can hit Dill up. We're happy to have a chat, looking for new clients, ready to grow our businesses. And that's why we do this podcast every week, much to my dismay. But Dill, I appreciate.
I just do it to see your face.
Mate, I appreciate your knowledge today on all things debt and a little bit of property ranting.
It's been good. I think if there's one point to summarize, right, it's like make hay while the sun's shining and take the opportunities to reduce your debt sooner. Do the plan and do the things that are going to help you do that whilst you have the income earning capacity, so that you don't get to that age later on when you have more debt than what you can afford to have, and it stops you from being able to retire or do the things that you love. So
100% agree. Mate, until this time next week, have a great week.
Have a ripper, mate. We'll see you soon.
Catch you soon.
Peace.
Go Wolves.